Fran McNulty reporting, and to discuss some of the issues raised there, I'm joined now in studio by Senator Martin Conway of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil TD Timmy Dooley, and from our Cork studio by Professor Robert Devoy of the Department of Geography at UCC. Martin, if I could talk to you first just about the repair issue that was raised in Fran's report. You're Clare-based, so you know all about the frustration people feel, and they feel that they haven't been helped enough by the government.
And it would be hard to blame them for feeling like that. If you have a business that effectively has been compromised completely as a result of what happened almost 15 months ago at this stage, particularly over the summer period, and I'm thinking in particular in Kilkee, where the complex works that had to be done went on right through the summer. And people absolutely are frustrated. And yes, government haven't done enough. But that said, government hadn't been faced with this type of situation before. To be quite frank with you, it was the worst coastal storm damage that we've experienced here in 70, 80 years. It was a new phenomenon, and the joined up thinking that's required between the OPW, councils, Department of the Environment and so forth is something that wasn't, in my view, in place. I would hope that going forward for experiences such as this in the future, that we will be a lot better prepared.
Okay, well, Timmy Dooley, we saw in Fran's report there that the local authorities haven't actually drawn down the funds. So what are your colleagues on Clare County Council doing?
Well, I think the difficulty has been trying to get planning in relation to some of the issues where there was problems in Kilkee. That's a very old structure, and they needed to deal with it very carefully. But of course, the difficulty that the council had right from the start, they weren't sure how much money they were getting. There were 2 flood events, and there were 2 opportunities to apply for funding. The first lot of money.
Simon Harris had to send out, I saw a press release he sent out in October, reminding councils that there was money to be drawn down. Would they please?
Yeah, but the difficulty was that the first lot of money was only promised. It wasn't actually provided to them, so they didn't know whether they'd get the next tranche of money. They had a requirement for 40 million, and they were only promised 17. So they were trying to do the loaves and fishes. They were trying to assess to the greatest extent possible where the real priorities were, and now they're only catching up. But the real difficulty here that I see is, notwithstanding the problems that have happened and the delay in terms of the government providing the funding, but nothing has happened in the intervening period of time to develop a policy around putting in place flood defences. Okay. And that's something that they're going to have to engage with Europe on. I mean, there was, as you know, a fund put in place, a solidarity fund from Europe, which the government didn't even apply for in this instance.
Okay, I want to bring Martin back in there, because Martin, you were writing in the Irish Independent in January, I think, talking about the need for billions of euro to be invested in flood defences. There's no billions of euro coming from your government.
No, up until recently, there was a meagre 45 million a year being spent on coastal protection in this country. In my humble opinion, you'd need 10 times that amount on a yearly basis. What I would like to see is a 10-year programme, properly structured with sound engineering solutions to put in place effective and workable protections. And I think that can only happen if there's a proper engagement with our European partners.
Well, do you really think that our European partners are going to give us the billions of euro that you're talking about?
Well, the bottom line is we got billions of euros for motorways in this country.
Those were different times, Senator.
But that said, we are a coastal, we are an island nation. We are at the periphery of Europe. We are under threat from the sea on a constant basis. There are thousands of people living along the coast in this country who are genuinely worried, will the sea come in on their homes at some stage?
Sure.
So as such, I think we have a responsibility to engage effectively with the European Solidarity Fund to try and get the terms of that fund changed so as that the billions, and I say billions sincerely, that are required are made available over a 10-year period, multi-annually, with proper engineering solutions to deal with what is a very complex issue.
Yeah, we can engage all we like, but if the money isn't there, or if our European partners aren't disposed to give it to us for what they may regard as less important infrastructural works, we're not going to get it.
Well, that is where the challenge lies. And, I don't have the answer as to how we're going to persuade them, but we have to.
Okay.
We owe it to the people in rural Ireland predominantly.
Okay, well, Timmy Dooley, we can't protect every square inch of the coastline. So which parts of County Clare would you be prepared to see?
I reject that assertion, because I reject part of that assertion, because the concern that I have is that unless somebody's house is affected, or if it's a hotel, or if it's a large group of housing. But in some cases, you're talking about farmland. That's the livelihood of so many rural families. They're dependent on that land in order to survive.
Okay,
now, if it becomes inundated with rocks, they're not able to farm it
okay,
anymore.
well, let me bring in
They
Robert
have the
Devoy.
same right, in my view, to run their business as people on the East Coast.
Okay, Robert Devoy in Cork, in the Department of Geography in UCC. Is that a realistic viewpoint?
I think the important thing is to come back to your introductory presentation, which emphasised the scale of tidal changes, for example, and particularly then the coupling of changes in tidal heights with what's going to be happening under climate warming, in that we will have sea level rise, and that is going to carry on into this next century.
So is it realistic to expect that we'll be able to save everything, or in your view, are we just going to have to let parts of rural Ireland fall into the sea?
I think that's a difficult one to answer. Clearly, the areas that are most under threat, the biggest infrastructure areas, the big cities, the low-lying areas, these are clearly places where you have to put investment. The interesting part of your presentation there is also focusing upon smaller rural towns, and then we're coming down to individual farms and small communities.
Yeah, but as Tim Dooley was just saying there, that we should be protecting, spending however much it takes to protect farmland. Is that realistic?
I think this is probably not realistic. It's not what's happening in other parts of the world. The view now, of course, this isn't a unique problem to Ireland. It's one that all coastal countries around the world will be facing under a climate that's warming, with increasing storms in some areas. And we would be particularly badly affected by increasing storms and with that sea level rise.
So we protect urban areas. We protect urban areas.
Obviously, yes. The key areas would be your industrial infrastructure, the urban areas which are providing critical sources of jobs. The rural environment, though, is important. It's difficult to get one's head around the historical attachment that people would have to that land, and of course it's part of everyday livelihood. But the reality of defending that 7,800 kilometres of coastline is a very difficult one to sell, when the cost of doing that is literally, we talk about astronomical tides, the cost of doing that is also astronomical.
Martin, astronomical cost to protect it. I mean, where do you draw the line? Do you protect a single house? Do you protect a couple of houses? Do you protect a group of houses?
Well, I think the top priority has to be people's homes. That followed on by people's businesses, which does include farming, and essential infrastructure, which is required in many of these areas from a tourism perspective. We can prioritise. It's not going to be solved in a few years. It's going to take a significant length of time. But I think that the mapping that's been done at the moment, and I believe that mapping, coastal mapping throughout the country, is almost completed. We're now going to see some sort of a priority list from the OPW on the most, vulnerable areas. And once we get that, there might be some indication then as to how we move forward.
Okay, but if there's a priority list, it implies that some areas are not on the priority list, some areas are not a priority. They can't be.
Well, I would share Timmy's view that all businesses and homes should be protected.
All businesses, including farms?
Yeah, well, I would share that view, but we have to start somewhere. And obviously you'll start with the most vulnerable and the people who are most at risk, and start at that and move along after that.
So if there's a single house on an exposed cliff, we should be paying to protect that?
Well, the bottom line is, them people got planning permission. So once the state gave them planning permission, the state have a responsibility to protect them.
Okay, Timmy, it's going to be very expensive to do that. Very expensive. And you're in effect asking taxpayers in other areas to pay for the defences of somebody who chose to live somewhere that could be at risk.
Yeah, when you talk, you gave the example of the independent house just on the top of a cliff. I'm sure, it was the case in Galway back, I think, in 1995, where a number of people were moved who, made that voluntary decision to move, and they were reallocated. Of course, that kind of engagement takes place. Of course, not every square inch of land can be protected, but where there's a viable farm, where there's a community of houses, as there was in certain parts of County Clare, then you need to put in place.
Which bits are you prepared not to protect?
Well, if there's an individual house in an isolated area, and the land isn't arable or isn't farmable, and the family concerned are prepared to say, we'll happily move if you provide us with a home elsewhere. Well, if that's the cheapest option and they're prepared to do that, then go with that. But if you're saying that, a number of farms, you're talking about a couple of 100 acres, or you're talking a farm of 100 acres, and that's now being destroyed and it's no longer viable, well then I say yes, you do work with all concerned to put in place an engineering solution to protect that farm.
But that's incredibly expensive.
Well, it's not. You see, it'd be very easy to wipe it all aside and say, that's rural Ireland. It's going to cost too much. Let's forget about it. Well, I don't subscribe to that theory. In fact, what I would say is, follow the mapping. Let's look at the engineering solutions and let's cost it. I mean, with no disrespect to Clontarf, and of course that has to be protected. I was interested to see my cousin there making her case as she was in relation to the coastline there. People say, yes, you've got to spend the money there. Well, I think you've got to protect the core of rural Ireland as well. And our coastal community, people use it from a tourism perspective.
Okay.
It's everybody looks at the Wild Atlantic Way and how important it is as an attractor to this country. So let's protect it.
A bit like the coastline, I'm afraid, our time is under threat as well. So thank you all very much. Miriam.